The romance genre in anime has always been one I felt a bit conflicted on. Don't get me wrong, some of my favorite shows like Kaguya-sama and Horimiya are rom-coms, but those are exceptions to the rule. While tropes in other genres like fantasy or shonen don't bother me as much as they maybe should, romance tropes, especially if used in excess, are ones that often put me off finishing the show entirely. Drawn out will they, won't they's, dumb misunderstandings, unnecessary love triangles, the list could go on. Those are all things I couldn't care less about. But to be honest, it sort of feels wrong to classify Too Many Losing Heroines as a romance anime. Because while it obviously does feature romance as a larger theme, the way it becomes the focus is much different from most other romance anime. Instead of following a couple from the moment they meet to their confession, with that confession being the ultimate goal, Makeine instead starts at the confession. On a confession that hasn't worked, and by doing so, it explores something that rarely gets explored in other romance anime: how people deal with getting rejected. What initially drew me to the series was the gorgeous art style and the awesome character designs. I really liked season 1, and the character interactions and humor really sold me on it. Normally, I think this would be the type of show that I would watch, enjoy, forget about for a while, then remember it when the next season releases. But for some reason, the show kept popping up in my mind. So with season 2 still not having a fixed release date, I decided to just bite the bullet and start reading the light novel. And to be honest, I was blown away. I read through all 8 volumes within a week, and I'm eagerly awaiting future volumes right now. So in this video, I will explore what makes the series so special and why I have fallen in love with it. If you enjoy this type of video, do consider leaving a like and subscribing, as it does massively help out the channel. If you're being honest, most romance anime feel like wish fulfillment, at least to some degree. Especially when being written from the perspective of the male character, the winning heroine, or to put it simply, the girl he ends up with at the end, is often an idealized version of what the author wants to see in a love interest. They're designed to fit the main character, rarely having to deal with things like rejection and its emotional aftermath. This means they inherently lack the complexity that comes with that. And this is exactly where Makeine shines, in my opinion. All of these so-called losing heroines experience a type of unresolved emotions that the winning heroines in other romance anime barely do. They experience rejection and grow as characters due to it. They learn that romance is not all there is to life and learn to appreciate the friends they have around them. And there are several different losing heroines, all of which react to their rejections differently, forming us the viewers about their personality and character. Arguably the most important of these losing heroines, especially during the beginning of the story, is Anna Yanami. She is the one that essentially kickstarts the plot with her interesting actions during episode 1 and continues to bring initiative to an otherwise rather passive protagonist in Nukumizu. We, as the viewers, and Nukumizu as well, get to know Yanami at what is most likely her lowest point. She had just told her childhood friend and crush of several years to chase after the transfer student Karen, indirectly letting the romance bloom. However, instead of accepting her defeat in grace, she tries to get an indirect kiss from him by drinking from the same straw he drank out of. And to be honest, while it is her at a low moment, that first scene still informs us a lot about Yanami as a person, or at least her flaws. She can be a bit emotional at times, and food often takes a priority over most other things. But at the same time, judging her based on only that scene would be a bit unfair. As we can see in her interactions with Nukumizu and the other members of the literature club, she is someone who deeply cares about the people around her, willing to do anything in her power if it means helping the people she cares about. But even besides her just being one of my favorite characters, her arc is one that informs a lot of the themes present in the series. Her words about there being only childhood friends and homewreckers, while being quite extreme, do ring true to some extent. Because it is true that in many anime, the childhood friend is the one that comes out as the losing party when love is involved. Because when people have been friends for so many years, it is often hard to take that next step, be bold, and risk part of that established relationship to pursue something more. On top of that though, being a losing heroine isn't the only issue Yanami has to contend with. Because not only did her crush choose someone else over her, the person he chose is a good friend of hers, making her future interactions with both of them super awkward. But that's also where Nukumizu becomes so important to her. Can and does become the shoulder she relies on when wanting to vent about her failing love life. In all honesty, Lemon Yakishio has quite a similar character arc to Yanami. She has a childhood friend she spent years with, then a new girl came along and confessed before she was ready to. But there are also some distinct differences between how the two handled their respective situations. While Yanami was quite passive in her approach, believing she was automatically going to get together with Sosuke simply because she had been his childhood friend for so long, Yakishio was quite a bit more proactive. Even if not entirely on purpose, she did confess and was all in all trying harder to get Ayano to notice her feelings for him. But she ran into a different issue with being childhood friends with your crush for that long. Because even if Yakishio was more sure of her feelings and had confessed before Ayano had found himself a girlfriend, he would have likely still been rejected. That's because, due to the sheer amount of time they spent together, Ayano can't see her as anything other than a family member. And then there's also the fact that Yakishio is just such a different person than Ayano. Both in personality and interests, these two couldn't be more different from each other. That by itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. After all, they do say opposites attract. However, when her competition is someone like Asagumo, someone who can understand his hobbies and interests much better, it comes as no surprise that these two hit it off immediately. However, while obviously not being a one-for-one replacement, Nukumizu has a lot of the traits Yakishio appreciated in Ayano. He's also shy, he's also a bookworm, but unfortunately, he's also just as dense. Now, the last of the three main losing heroines is quite a bit different to the others. Whereas Yakishio and Yanami clearly fall into the category of childhood friends, Komari cannot be classified as anything other than a homewrecker, if Yanami's words are to be believed. While it is true that childhood friends in anime do often lose, there are some exceptions, because sometimes the reason two childhood friends aren't together isn't because they don't like each other, it's just because they're too shy to actually admit their feelings for each other. That's exactly what was the case between Komari's crush, Tamaki, and Tsukinoki. And honestly, while Komari might not be my favorite of the losing heroines, she's the one I was most impressed with throughout watching the first season. She's extremely socially anxious, and that might even be an understatement still. It's bad to the degree that she can't even talk to new people in person, instead have to type the things she wants to say on her phone instead. And yet, despite being so anxious, she's still very brave. Despite knowing she would get rejected, she still confessed to her crush. Despite often being so unsure of herself, she still wants and does follow her passion of writing. Not many people can say they have that kind of confidence and that kind of bravery. One might initially think that Komari and Nukumizu are two quite similar people, and on the surface they are. They're both shy, they don't really want to talk to other people. It's also why these two, despite bickering with each other, have such good chemistry. But Komari and Nukumizu do differ in one very important way. Whereas Nukumizu is often very unsure of himself, very passive, Komari is very active, knows what she wants, and tries to get it. That's what I appreciate about her. Now, I did say Komari was the last losing heroine, and while it is true as far as anime onlys are concerned, future volumes of the novel introduce someone who fits that archetype just as well, if not better than the other characters talked about so far. But if you are an anime only and don't want to get spoiled on any plot points of what will be covered in season 2 and beyond, I suggest skipping this section, the student council section that comes next. With that out of the way, let's talk about the newest addition to the literature club. Shiratama Riko is quite an interesting character, especially with the way she acts around the other members of the club. But what really interests me here is how she offers quite a different and unique take on the idea of a losing heroine. In Yanami's idea of the world, there's always a childhood friend and a home wrecker in romance, with the childhood friend always deserving to win. But what happens when there are two childhood friends? In a way, Shiratama is the most unfortunate out of all the losing heroines, because she never had a chance in the first place. The person she fell in love with was several years older and already in love with her older sister, and she knows it. Despite still doing her best to steal Tanaka away from her sister, it's more a childish attempt at getting back at her sister rather than an actual serious attempt. In my opinion, featuring someone like Shiratama shows a different aspect of love that none of the other characters really showcase. The others all fell in love with people in their age group, but while that is the most common occurrence, reality often isn't quite that simple. Sometimes people fall in love with people older than them or people that are already taken, in which case they have most likely already lost before they can even give it a try. But even beyond the so-called losing heroines, there are a few other characters that deserve to get a bit of recognition and attention, with two members of the student council, Yumeko Shikiya, Tiara Basori, being some of the most important characters for the story and especially Nukumizu's character development. Because all of the losing heroines are largely occupied with their own love lives, trying to get over their rejections, they don't really perceive Nukumizu's struggles a lot of the time. And although Yanami, Yakushio and Komari do grow closer to him over the course of the series, none of them really have the interest or the guts to pursue him romantically, at least so far. Shikiya is an interesting character because the way she ignores personal space and gets close to others is something Nukumizu is very ill-equipped to handle. He thinks of himself as a background character, and having someone with that much main character energy interact with him will over time inevitably have to have him rethink that view. However, with someone as dense as Nukumizu, actions alone often aren't enough to get through to him, because someone like Shikiya could just be treating him like this because, well, that's just how she treats everyone. Yanami, Yakushio and Komari obviously can't be into him either, because there's someone else each of them have a crush on. At least that's what he thinks. A lot of this thinking is also shaped by his belief that no one would ever fall in love with him. But there's something more undeniable than actions that can be misconstrued and interpreted in multiple different ways. And those are words. Or, to be more specific, a confession. That is why Tiara Basori is not only my favorite character of the series, but also possibly the most important for Nukumizu's development as a character. He needs someone to be blunt with their feelings. Tiara is exactly that. I was very surprised by the recent development for actually confessing, but I was also very happy about it. Although it hadn't really felt that way up until that point, there was a real danger the series would develop into one where confessions and any relationship progression would take insanely long to happen. And while Nukumizu might take a while to actually respond to those feelings, the mere fact that those feelings have been voiced is a huge step in the right direction. Despite that, I unfortunately do think Nukumizu will end up rejecting Tiara, turning her into yet another losing heroine. Now, I've saved what I perceive to be the best for last. While watching the anime, I liked Nukumizu, sure, but I didn't really think he was that special or noteworthy. He seemed like your average harem protagonist for the most part. Shy, not particularly noteworthy looks, but kind enough for the girls' interest in him to be somewhat justified. However, there was already one false assumption in that statement. While the girls around him do gradually grow fond of him, it's quite a slow process, and especially in the beginning, calling it a harem couldn't be further from the truth. At the start, he resembles an emotional relief animal more than he resembles an actual love interest for the girls around him. And while shy is a fitting adjective for him, it also doesn't really tell the full story. He's someone who sees himself as a background character or NPC. In fact, that mindset is so ingrained in him that he's surprised when the characters actually want to befriend him. When others around him already consider themselves his friend, he doesn't see it that way and instead needs verbal confirmation to be sure of their friendship. That need for verbal confirmation is another thing that makes him so interesting. While the reason for it hasn't really been explored yet, I do suspect there were some incidents in his past that made him the way he is, and that will be explored further down the line. Fitting to his character development is rather slow, but I know it will happen. When it happens, it will be glorious. While I don't think Nukumizu is the most interesting character in the anime adaptation. His thought process and the way he's written in the novels elevate the story from a pretty decent rom-com to one of my all-time favorites. After finishing the series, I must admit I caught a pretty bad case post-anime stress disorder. Normally, I can move on from a series pretty quickly. I remember the series of course, but putting it to the back of my mind and picking up something else is usually no issue. However, with a select few series, moving on like that isn't quite possible. I start thinking about them even when I'm watching or reading something else. I start trying to get every possible piece of content of the series I can get, be it side stories and spin-offs, and when that is not enough, I sometimes even turn to fanfics. This hasn't happened to me often, and when it does, it's usually by a series that later on turn into some of my all-time favorites, be it Re:Zero or Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. And Makeine is on the road to become one of my all-time favorites as well. Its cast is fantastic, with all of their character interactions being a joy to read. If the next few volumes live up to my expectations, I might have to put it as my personal favorite rom-com series. With that being said, I really look forward both to future volumes of the novel to see how the story progresses, as well as future seasons of the anime to see how the already written story gets adapted. Thanks for watching.